Welcome. We are thrilled to have you joining us today for a special live webcast presentation. My name is Chelsea Domenico, and I'd like to welcome you to our webcast focus on the 2019 World's Most Ethical Companies and your guide to applying this year. Over the next hour, you'll hear from my colleagues here at Ethisphere as they dive into what the WME process looks like, providing you with an overview and how to start. They'll also focus on the changes to the application process this year and what to expect when submitting documentation. If you've ever joined us for an Ethisphere webcast before, you know we love to take your questions and answer them throughout the presentation. Our goal for every webcast is to encourage you to ask as many questions as you can while you're here. We'd like to make this as engaging as possible and a conversation with you because today's presentation is all about answering the questions that you have. So please use the question feature that you'll find within your webcasting platform. We do anticipate a handful of questions throughout the day, so if we do not get to your question during the live session, we will follow up with you via email if we do run out of time. Following the live webcast, you'll receive a handful of items from us, including the recording and presentation materials from today. And most importantly, if you're a past applicant, you will receive your custom survey link to the WME application. And if you're new to the process, you'll receive a link to request your survey. But before I turn the floor over, I'd like to introduce you to my colleagues here at Ethisphere. So I'd like to introduce Clea Navazi, our Director of Marketing and Media here at Ethisphere, and she'll introduce herself and then turn it over to Doug. Clea?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As Chelsea mentioned, my name is Clea Navazi, and I have been with Ethisphere for, going on 8 years or so. And in that time, I have worked very closely with the World's Most Ethical Companies application and World's Most Ethical Companies community, mostly on the sort of tail end of the process and focusing on communications and helping the honoree community make their publications. Doug, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Clea, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you're dialing in. We're extremely excited to be able to talk to you all today about the 2019 process. As Clea did mention, my name is Douglas Allen. I am one of our directors here within the Data and Services Group, and I spend a majority of my time working with organizations throughout the WME assessment process, and I'm very happy to be with you all today to describe a little bit about who we are, what we do with respect to WME, and how to get started for those of you who may be new to the process. Michael Burns listed, he's here with us in spirit, but Michael Byrne is our Senior Vice President within Ethisphere and also works very closely with the team, amongst many other of our individuals within the WME assessment and evaluation team as well. So for today's conversation, it's going to be a robust one. We have a lot of information to cover with respect to a little bit about what the WME process is, for those of you who may be new. We'll go into a little bit of the methodology, the components of an application, how to get started, again, for those of you who may be either new to the process or on the fence about the process for 2019. And for the veterans on the line, we'll discuss a little bit about the changes for 2019. Very excited about some of the improvements we've made to both the methodology and process. And time permitting, we'll address a little bit of the common pitfalls that we see when folks navigate the application process, as well as discuss some dates and take your questions as well. So just to reiterate a point Chelsea made at the outset of today's presentation, everyone on the line today will be getting the email following today's webcast, for those of you who are attending live, with more information on how to apply and register for the process. Now, those of you who have applied in the past will be receiving information automatically, so no need to reach out unless you do not receive a notification. So all this will be coming, all the materials we'll be discussing today will be coming shortly after today's call as well. So very good. And I had mentioned a little bit about, those who are new to the process versus veterans, and we developed today's discussion really with everyone in mind. For those of you who may be longtime devotees to Ethisphere in the process, who are very familiar, we have resources dedicated just for you for today. So for those of you who are viewing this as a recording, I would draw your attention to the what's changed for this year, the dates, as well as some pitfalls, again, for those of you who may be veterans. Now, for those of you who are embarking on this process new for the first time for 2019, pay particular attention to what we look at during our evaluation, how to get started, and what the application process looks like. And again, looking at our registration list, we have several folks who are also, I believe, curious. So maybe a supplier, a customer, your boss had mentioned WME, you're interested in what this is. Pay attention throughout. This whole presentation will be a great resource for you as well. But again, here we want to make sure that we call out some specific resources for you all to consider as we navigate today's discussion. So a little bit about Ethisphere overall. Again, for those of you who may be new to Ethisphere and sort of exploring WME for the first time, our organization was established back in 2006 really as an advocate for identifying codifying and promoting best-in-class standards of ethical business conduct. And we do that through three key tenets that underlie our mission. Really, we focus on identifying, evaluating, and really measuring corporate ethics standards, really grounded in a focus on data. Data has been an underlying theme of what we do across all of our activities, and that's no exception here for WME. We also recognize and celebrate extraordinary organizations who excel against these standards. And thirdly, we really put resources towards building and maintaining a platform that will allow us to socialize the concepts we learn, to really rise all boats with the tide in terms of communicating what we found. And we do that through events, publications, conferences, and so on. So you'll see throughout today that the WME process, the World's Most Ethical Companies program, touches on really all three of these in great detail. So what is the WME process? What is the World's Most Ethical Companies program? And really, in a word, again, for those of you who may be new to the process, the WME program, for short, it's really an evaluation and a celebration of companies who are exemplars of doing business with integrity. It focuses on companies who establish and maintain an internal ethical workforce culture and really that demonstrate, I would say, an engaged and values-based leadership team as well. And more specifically, when looking at WME, the core of the process and the program is that really it's a respected recognition. This is the 13th year we've been recognizing organizations as part of WME. And so we're extremely proud to have been able to really maintain this award for so long and really lend credence to the fact that what we do with respect to WME is significant and well respected in the marketplace. Secondly, in terms of what the WME program is, it really is, for those who engage in the process, it's a phenomenal gap analysis and road mapping tool. Folks who engage in the application discuss experiencing real value right away in terms of getting immediate feedback in terms of the program and practices just through a review of the questions in the application itself. So it's a phenomenal gap analysis and program roadmap tool. Thirdly, it's a leading benchmarking data source through vetted insights and experts as well. So this is a program that has built really best-in-class data in this space with respect to what leading organizations are doing with respect to the areas we cover. And what's really unique for WME in particular is the process, the methodology, the subject areas that are covered are reviewed on an annual basis, both by internal ethisphere experts, but we also manage a methodology committee as well that pay time and attention to making sure that what's being measured, what's being looked at is really best in class and on the bleeding edge of best practice. So a lot of great insights coming out of this process. And really, at the end of the day, a common question we get is, so why does WME matter? And really, we can go on in terms of why we believe this is important, but don't take our word for it. We really believe the proof is in the performance. We've had a chance to partner with some research organizations that allow us to benchmark those WME companies who are publicly traded to see how they compare against relevant risk indices. And if you just look at last year's class of honorees, the 2018 World's Most Ethical Companies against a comparable risk index, we found that over a 3-year span, about a 5% delta in performance between these two equity classes. Quite impressive. And actually, if you expand this to a 5-year time frame, it actually expands to 10% in terms of a difference in performance. So it's really something we've adopted, and we really believe in that what we do it matters with respect to WME. And now, Clea, would you want to touch on a little bit about why folks should go through the process itself? So, Clea, I'll turn it over to you.
Absolutely, and it's not too different from sort of what you just mentioned about the gap analysis, but we hear a lot from companies about the opportunity to work across functions, how it's invaluable. It really does bolster the relationships, but it also creates opportunities for these different functions to work together on future program initiatives and brings different perspectives to the table. We hear from companies that they use the survey as a guide for program improvement and program development. And as Doug mentioned, that gap analysis is sort of unrivaled given the companies that you're being compared to. And so into this last bullet, you see your scores. Once you get that scorecard at the end of the process, you are being compared to the best in class programs, not just anybody who decided to participate in the survey, but really those best in class programs. And then if you want to take to the next slide, Doug. The analytical scorecard. So this is one of the really great outcomes from the process. So what you're seeing here is just a few screenshots from last year's scorecard. We tell you a little bit more about the community that you're being compared against. We remind you a little bit about the framework, and then we go into some really great analysis. So you will get your scores in all 5 of the categories that Doug's going to talk about, as well as your overall score. And you will see what the average scores were in those categories, as well as the overall score and average for the entire honoree list. And then you will get an analysis of some of the key trends that we saw out of this year's survey. We see every year that the benchmark continues to move, it continues to get harder. Companies are doing really new and innovative things. And so as we move on and develop programs, you will see some really great research and points called out in the scorecard itself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Clea. So in terms of what we look at as part of the evaluation process, for those who've been through an application before, the categories and weights have not changed for 2019. And for those of you who may be new to the process, what we look at in terms of determining who makes and does not make the list, our assessment methodology is comprised of 5 main categories. 5 main weighted categories, I should say, and these are all addressed through about 1,000 different data points we collect across these 5 weighted categories. First and foremost, we take a look at the ethics compliance program within each organization, and this includes elements such as looking at the program structure, responsibility, and resources involved, oversight, tone at the top, written standards. We'll look at enforcement discipline practices, evaluation of the program and how it's communicated, training, communications, and awareness, so on and so forth. That comprise the main weight and the main component of the overall assessment. We also take a look at culture. How does your organization measure its culture of ethics? How is it communicated? What are the outcome of these measurement efforts? And really, we take a look at the extent to which your organization, again, establishes that credible tone from the top and middle, the frequency with which culture is evaluated, and again, methods and outcomes associated with those measurement efforts. Thirdly, sustainability, corporate social responsibility. Here we take a look at, as you would imagine, efforts by your organization with respect to environmental stewardship, community involvement. We'll look at corporate philanthropy, workplace impact and well-being, your employee programs and such, supply chain and engagement efforts, as well as oversight of those programs as well. The last quarter of the application weight is comprised of both corporate governance and leadership and reputation. So for corporate governance, we take a really deep dive into the oversight and the risk management practices of the governance team, engagement, interaction with stakeholders amongst your board or governing authority, and again, the expertise level among those members as well. Leadership and reputation, we've put a focus here on really the legal compliance and ethical track record of each applicant organization. What awards have been won? How is reputation measured? What is the reputation of the organization? Are there awards, certain accolades gathered throughout the year that are particularly pertinent for our methodology? And really, we want to get a sense of examples of leadership locally, nationally, globally by your organization, by your leadership team that demonstrates how your organization is going above and beyond with respect to not only behaving and adopting ethical business standards, but communicating them more broadly outside your own doors. So here we again have a sense of what we look at with respect to the overall application process. So for those curious on how to actually apply, very simple, 3-step process with respect to how to complete an application. First and foremost, we have developed what we call the Ethics Quotient Questionnaire. And this is a approximately 200 question survey that Ethisphere and its methodology committee have developed that allows us the opportunity to inventory the current state of your program and practices. And this is the primary component of any given application for WME. Secondly, we request that you submit a variety of documentation to not only support your survey answers and allow us to verify select answers, but also to allow our team to attest to the quality of various programs and efforts as well. So not only, for example, do we want to get a sense of what communication efforts are being done to disseminate the message of compliance and ethics across your organization, but we'd like to get a sense of what they actually look like, the quality, the format, the modality, the frequency, and so on. So that's step 2, gather and supporting documentation. And the third step is simply addressing the application fee as well. In order to be considered for the honoree, for the designation, we do ask that an application fee is submitted before the deadline date. And speaking of the deadline date, we request that all 3 of these steps be completed on or before November 9, 2018.
Hey, Doug, before we move on, we did receive a question from the floor that I wanted to make sure that we address. If you could go back to the stock analysis so that we can just explain that a little bit. So the stock analysis itself is a comparison of all honorees who are listed on some form of on a stock exchange of some sort. So that is based off of stock performance for those years. It's 2018 honorees compared to the US large cap index from January 2015 to December 2017. So it's based off stock performance. It's not an arbitrary number. It's stock performance numbers. So I hope that
That's
answers
right.
the question.
And there's more information on our website about this particular image, as well as a downloadable copy as well for those of you who might be interested in either leveraging it or exploring it further as well. Again, so here we have the 3 steps on how to apply. And so going into each in a little bit more detail, we'll begin first with the ethics quotient questionnaire. I had mentioned this is a questionnaire. It's approximately 200 questions. We find the 8 sections that comprise the survey on the left and the respective question count on the right. We do employ quite a bit of skip logic throughout, so you won't expect to receive the entire library of questions as part of the survey, as part of your assessment rather, but we do expect a large portion of them to come through. As you can see, commensurate with the weighting assigned to each category, the ethics compliance program comprises a bulk of the survey. In section 4, which is the ethics compliance program, is actually broken out into several different subsections as well. We have program structure and resources, due care, written standards, et cetera, et cetera. These follow, as you can clearly see, the federal sentencing guidelines, their definition of an effective program, and again, provide some semblance of guidance in terms of how to navigate this process as well. So this gives you a sense of what we evaluate as part of that ethics quotient survey process. And for those of you who are embarking on the survey or who are curious on the application process, we do provide access to the survey well in advance in a downloadable copy and format. So you're welcome to review the questions, review the survey before getting too far into whether or not deciding if you want to apply. So we do invite all to explore the question set and taking a look at the resources in advance. And this, again, gives you a high-level summary of what's to be expected as it pertains to our ethics quotient survey. Again, this is, as I had mentioned previously, a survey and a process that we look at every year. For those who have taken the application before, you'll notice a few minor changes to the structure and organization of the survey for 2019. Specifically, we've pulled out several questions related to third-party management and built in a dedicated section for that, as well as relocating a lot of the risk assessment-specific questions that was formerly Section 4D and disseminated again throughout the survey in various sections as well. So here, again, gives you a skeletal overview of what you can expect when you embark on the survey process as well. We did receive a question on the floor regarding how enforcement action or litigation factor into the evaluation overall. Great question. And I'll defer back to our weighting chart here to describe this in a little bit more detail. So with respect to enforcement action and litigation, we understand that organizations are in constant flux with respect to litigation. There's always litigation going on in many different contexts. That it is not an automatic disqualifier by any stretch in the event that there is an ongoing action for the organization. With respect to leadership and reputation as it pertains to enforcement actions and so on, that's where the scores are impacted by that criteria. Now, it's an overall, with respect to overall assessment weight, it is a small component, only 10%. However, in the event of severe action, in limited circumstances, we do reserve the right to disqualify organizations based on the findings of that. More information is found in our FAQ section, as well as the survey itself, and opportunities to discuss and provide additional context on any outstanding action or adverse media on your organization is provided both in the survey and as part of our overall process as well. So we do welcome your thoughts and input and response to any outstanding negative media on the topic as well. So we discussed the EQ questionnaire and what's involved there at a high level. I had mentioned the second main component is documentation. So once or concurrent with the completion of our ethics quotient questionnaire, we also provide with you a list of documentation we would expect to see as part of the overall application. So in addition to the survey, we will provide all applicants, and you're welcome to, again, to download this in advance, what we call the supporting documentation guidelines. And this is a document we've constructed that allows you to follow along in terms of, on a section-by-section basis, what documents we would expect to see, guidance on how to package them up and organize said documents, and guidance on how to submit them to us to make sure they arrive securely. To give you a sense of the scope, the documentation guidelines outline 32 specific items across 10 of the categories. So most of the categories require at least some documentation to verify not only your responses, but again, attest to the quality of the programs underlying it as well. New for 2019, so for those of you who have been through the process, you'll notice we have built in some more clear descriptions of what we would like to see for documentation. So I am proud to say that this is, I think, our most clear and articulate guidance on documentation amongst any application year previously. In addition, our guidance documents that we'll provide actually associate key document requests from Ethisphere to specific questions of the EQ survey as well. So if you see this table to the right, you'll be able to quickly identify what we're looking to achieve, or what we're looking to see, sort of the overarching theme behind that request, as well as the specific question numbers that it pertains to. So hopefully in reference to the question number, you'll be able to get a clearer sense of the context behind the request, and hopefully guide you further in terms of providing that materials for us. We're very happy to offer all who apply the ability to upload directly to Ethisphere servers through FTP, the documentation requested as well. It's a very easy process. We'll be happy to set you up, or everyone up who requests it, with that modality of delivery. And furthermore, a question we get commonly throughout each application year is, given the sensitivity on some of the items requested, we fully expect and appreciate your ability to redact information where need be. For instance, information on board guidance or board reporting. We fully expect materials to be redacted and covered up as needed. So we certainly appreciate your ability to do so, and allow you and permit documents that are redacted as well. With respect to documents overall, a little bit of guidance for those of you who are considering applying is, please follow the guidelines closely. We, again, put a tremendous amount of effort to make sure that the requests are clearly articulated, and we're the ways in which to provide the materials and supply the materials is articulated clearly as well. So please follow the guidelines. That are there to support you and to guide you in that part of the process. And certainly we look forward to receiving the materials as part of that as well.
Hey, Doug, before we move,
yeah.
we did on the floor about obtaining a copy of the survey prior to deciding whether to submit. That's a great question. After this webcast, as Chelsea mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending a follow-up email. In that email will contain an application guide. That application guide has a bunch of information, some really great reasons why to apply, some FAQs, but more importantly, it has a bunch of links that are important, including a PDF copy of the full questionnaire and a Word document link as well. So if you want to download the entire survey, capture your responses in a Word document, and then use that as the guide as you're going through and completing the online survey, we will be providing those links. It's in the application guide. That's a really key point. A link as well to the documentation guide that Doug is talking about is in that document as well. I believe it's on page 5. That will be included in an email that comes at the close of this webcast, or when we send out the recording and presentation. So that application guide is a really key document. Highly encourage you to see page 5. That will have a survey, the survey in PDF, a survey in Word. We do not accept paper surveys, so you will need to go online and complete the survey online, but it's a great resource if you're trying to capture responses from various functions within the organization.
Yeah, thank you, Clea. That's a great point. Just to reiterate, we do provide all the materials discussed, so the questionnaire, the documentation request guidelines, all the information that any applicant receives. You're welcome to peruse and request well in advance of proceeding with the application as well. So we welcome you to the opportunity to review the materials, to get a sense of, again, for those of you who are on the fence on whether or not to apply, if this is the right year to apply for you, please review. Take a look, and you're welcome to review all the materials in advance. We do request the surveys submitted online, as Clea did mention, but we do provide you both a PDF and Word copy at your request, really as a resource to let you, as we've heard from many organizations, that will compartmentalize versions of the survey and distribute them to various stakeholders internally for completion. So again, a great resource to utilize as you navigate the survey as well. A few little bits of advice before we proceed. Specific to the survey, again, Clea mentioned we do request the surveys completed online. However, we strongly recommend reviewing and organizing your answers in advance of beginning the online survey. The online survey itself is quite extensive, as you will see in the PDF and Word copies. So having a chance to organize yourself in advance is a much more efficient use of your time when you do finally engage with the online survey as well. Secondly, and again, this will come up, and I think in the pitfall section towards the end of the presentation, but we do suggest that one individual within your organization is dedicated and owns the process with respect to completing the survey. It's a little bit easier from a technical standpoint and can avoid some potential errors if one individual is dedicated to sitting down and completing the survey online as well. So great question, and thank you, Clea, for your clarification. So with the ethics quotient survey and documentation requests in mind, how are honorees determined? So once those two elements of the application are complete, this is a little bit of background in terms of what Ethisphere goes through in making the determination for the list for 2019. So when you complete the survey, what happens is an automatic, what we call a self-reported ethics quotient score is generated and is automatically assigned to your organization. Now, this is not something that is displayed as you go through the process, but something our assessment team sees on the back end. With that self-reported EQ score in mind, we also then turn to your documentation and conduct a thorough analysis of the materials provided. Again, not only vetting in certain areas, but really looking at the quality of the programs and practices underlying the materials you present. So as I had mentioned before, looking at training, not only does the training exist to verify your survey answers, but attesting to the quality of training. What you had selected manager-specific training is in place for your organization. How robust is this training? Is it really designed with the user in mind? What's the modality in place? Is engagement levels high, so on and so forth. So that's really how documentations are used. And really, we take that opportunity to, as the review team, to adjust scores as well. So the self-reported score through a review of the documentation does get adjusted up and down based upon what we found through your submission in the documentation. Thirdly, the Ethisphere team then conducts what we call a media search and media and reputation search. So any adverse media, news sources, litigation, outstanding litigation, any history of misconduct elements. We take a look at your overall track record, ethical track record. All these things are considered through not only publicly available media sources and publicly available research sources, but also through reputation partners such as RepRisk. We compile sort of a reputation and ethical track record profile for your organization, which then impacts that leadership and reputation score as well. So in addition to the documentation review, go ahead, Clea, was there a question?
Yeah, so we had a question about what is RepRisk. So if you could give a brief overview of how we use them.
Oh yeah, RepRisk is one of our, it's a Switzerland-based firm who specializes in quantifying reputation risk for organizations. Anyone's welcome to join the service at reprisk.com, I believe is their website. They provide input in terms of not only reputation scores that we consider as part of our overall assessment, but also synthesize news sources from around the world that our assessment team reviews in conjunction with other public sources in determining reputation scores overall, leadership and reputation scores overall. So that's how that organization's used and their output's used as part of the process. And so their findings, in addition to our own research, and also your documentation scores, all are combined and adjust that self-reported EQ score. And through that analysis, we arrive at what's called the final EQ score. And this is the ultimate score which is assigned to your organization. Now, it's the final EQ score is one consideration in making the WME determination for any given company. Given the fact that our single assessment process applies to all organizations, we've really made a concerted effort to make sure that when evaluating organizations, we do so in the context of like peers. So we will evaluate your EQ score and overall application in the context of your peers. We define peers such as those in similar industries, sizes, risk profiles, geographies, ownership structures. We compile these peer sets and rank organizations against one another and compare their applications against each other. Those who perform the best within those groups are then designated world's most ethical companies for a given year and are notified as such, typically Q1, mid-Q1, and we'll discuss timing as well. So this is a high-level description of how honorees are determined. And gives you a sense of sort of what we go through as the evaluation team in reviewing applications as well. So again, that's a high-level description between the survey, documentation, and sort of our evaluation process. So with that in mind, how do you get started? For those who are, again, new or curious to the process, here's a quick sort of checklist for you to get started in pursuing the application or exploring if the application is appropriate for you. First and foremost, we want to make sure that your organization is eligible to apply. And to do so, we suggest that based on structure, the only organizations who are not eligible include nonprofits, nonprofit colleges, universities, governments, NGOs, government majority-owned companies, and so on. Those are the classifications of organizations who are not eligible. However, any company, public or private, for-profit, not-for-profit, U.S.-based or foreign-based, is eligible to apply for World's Most Ethical Companies. Clea, was there a question on the floor as well with respect to?
There was, and I do apologize that we keep going back and forth. So,
sure.
But I did want to make sure to And so we received a question about last year's survey. So oftentimes we have companies who've applied in the past, but maybe there's somebody new involved in the process. We do have copies of last year's survey, so you can make a request. It's probably best not to do that in this chat, but if you send an email to Doug and myself, our email addresses are at the end of this presentation. If you send the request for last year's survey responses, we can PDF that and send it over to you. The other question I received was the submitting of documentation. Yes, we will be using the same platform, the FTP server that we have used for the last couple of years. That process will remain the same. If you're new to the process, you can request that FTP access in the form submission that we will provide a link to after the webcast. And then one thing I did want to clarify is even if you request a survey link, if you're new to the process, you request a survey link, you're not obligated to apply, you're not obligated to pay the fee. You're only obligated to pay the fee if you want to be considered and want to submit the full survey, and we have to do the review of your company. So those are the three questions that I got, that I'm getting quite a few of. I hope that answers everything. And we'll continue to watch the questions come through. Sorry to interrupt, Doug.
No, quite all right. Please do, and continue to bring the questions for the group on the line today. These are great questions as well. A clarification too regarding requesting last year's results. As Clea had mentioned, you are welcome. If you have applied in the past, we are more than happy to provide you a copy by request of your previous year's survey results, which we do keep on file. I would actually suggest sending an email, and we'll display this email at the end of the presentation, to wmeapplications@ethisphere.com. That'll make sure that your request is processed as fast as possible, and one member of our team actually addresses that request. So again, we're happy to provide that to you if perhaps the individual who completed the survey last year is no longer with your organization, or if you need a written record of what was completed last year, we're happy to do so as well. A little caveat to that request is that, of course, and we'll touch on that here in just a few slides, but we have made substantial changes to the 2019 survey, so do expect quite a bit of changes year over year with respect to the questionnaire itself. Another questions come in regarding when we do our research regarding the ethical track record or litigation history of any given applicant, how far back do we go? Phenomenal question. And our rule here is, our rule of thumb is 5 years. We default to 5 years of history with any given organization. There have been, in the event of substantial, I'll call it substantial issues, we have gone back farther, or they have weighed more heavily on the timeline than just the 5 years. But generally speaking, we go back 5 years with respect to evaluating the history of misconduct or behavior within any given organization as well. Okay, so going back to how to get started, I had mentioned confirm your eligibility if your organization passes with respect to being eligible to apply. You're welcome to begin. As we had mentioned at the outset, all of you in attendance today on the live webcast will be receiving an email with all the information you need to get started following today's discussion. If you do not receive that email by tomorrow, August 8th, you're welcome to email us to make sure that we didn't lose it in spam or it went to the wrong address. So please feel free to reach out to us and request it at your convenience. If you are a previous honoree or previous applicant, we will again be sending you the application materials automatically as well. So look for that in your inbox again, either today, no later than tomorrow as well. For those of you who may be joining us on a recording of this webcast as well, feel free to jump on our website at worldsmostethicalcompanies.com. We will have an application page set up. There'll be a registration form you're welcome to fill out. And by doing so, our team will review your registration and send you within, I believe, 1 to 3 business days a copy of your application materials for you to review. And again, these materials will be inclusive of the survey, the documentation request, information on submitting your application fee, and everything else related to how to apply as well. We had a couple of other questions come in. I'll take a look at those. We have one regarding format of documentation. More specifically, are we able to provide access to a SharePoint site containing supporting documentation? Yes, you are. And that actually begs a broader question of documentation format as part of your request. We do welcome files in any given format, essentially. So we generally stick to PDF and Word type documents, or rather Office type documents, but we do accept things such as video files, audio files, multimedia that, again, may demonstrate your various communication and training efforts. We welcome all those different formats, links to various internal websites, internet sites, SharePoint sites, to the extent that you're able to share. We do welcome all files and formats as well. There's no size limitations. Through our FTP process, we do welcome files of all shapes and sizes. So you're welcome to provide, as long as it fits the criteria we specify. As part of the documentation guidelines, you're welcome to provide the materials in any format and type and structure that you do see fit. So great question as well. And we do work with you if in the event that the FTP process either isn't compliant with perhaps your own IT security issues or policies internally at your organization. We can work with you in coming up with an alternative solution with respect to transferring documents. The FTP solution is by far the easiest and I think most convenient for most organizations. So we do defer and really default to that particular structure when supplying materials as well. Great. So third step regarding how you get started. So confirming eligibility was one, reviewing the materials, step two, and also we strongly recommend reviewing our frequently asked questions section of our website. It's compiled of questions we've received over the years that continuously come up. It's a great resource for you in terms of getting some of those common questions addressed, as well. And of course, myself, Clea, and the team, we are available for questions as well as you navigate the materials. So please don't hesitate to reach out in the event that any questions do arise as well. So that leads us to what has changed for 2019. Really excited about some of these changes we've made both to our process and methodology going into the 2019 application period. As I'd mentioned before, both the internal experts here at Ethisphere as well as our methodology committee spend a tremendous amount of time in ensuring that what we ask and what we measure is really on the cutting edge of best practices specific to measuring culture, establishing ethical business practices, engaging leadership. We want to make sure that for all the time and attention you all on the phone today put towards this application, we make it worthwhile for you by returning, feedback that's relevant based upon current best practices. So with respect to what's changed for this year, from the survey perspective, we've made concerted effort to update and adjust really every single section of the survey. I had provided some examples previously of the sections that we've adjusted, we've rearranged, we've added a third-party risk management section. We've adjusted some of the elements of the risk assessment portion that was formerly Section 4D, and we're really excited to show you guys what's been done with respect to updating the survey for 2019. I think you're really going to appreciate some of the changes we've made. To give you an example of some of the specific adjustments we've made, substantively speaking, we've made a tremendous amount of improvements to governance section of the survey. So, for example, we've gone into further detail in terms of how you're refreshing the board. How are they being educated, expanding oversight into CSR, oversight practices into talent, into culture from your governance authority or your board. We've put a lot of emphasis on root cause analysis across the survey as well. So really, are you making a concerted effort to conduct a root cause analysis following the investigation after misconduct? Does a formal taxonomy exist? What's the scope of these reviews? What's the outcome following these investigations? So really, it's an increased focus on this particular section of the survey as well. Furthermore, I had mentioned an increased emphasis on the management of third-party risk, looking at the expectations, ethical expectations you place on your third parties, if at all. How are you evaluating them? Are they held to specific standards? Any sustainability or CSR-related requirements as well of your third parties? Also, is any assistance provided? Are you working in tandem with your third parties to develop some type of program with respect to sustainability or CSR? So a lot of interesting questions that we've developed in the specific areas through various different feedback outlets. We had a question come in regarding whether or not questions will be highlighted for 2019 that differ from 2018. Great question. For those of you who did apply last year, you'll recall that the survey indicated key questions that we had updated year over year. For 2019, we have not done that practice only because just about every single question has been looked at and reviewed and perhaps modified in some way, shape, or form. So we really request that you approach the survey with a brand new set of eyes. I think the work you've done in previous applications will certainly serve you well in navigating 2019, but really the extent of the changes made and updates made across the survey are substantial enough that we did not highlight specific questions throughout as well. Looking again at some of the major changes for 2019, we did put additional emphasis on ethical culture and how it's measured. So looking at more detail into what efforts your organization is making into measuring culture across your organization, are site visits done, how frequently, methodologies employed behind surveys, as well as what are the outcomes of those practices as well. So a lot of really good updates with respect to culture and other elements. And also a big change with respect to leadership and reputation. If those who applied last year may notice that we have diminished the emphasis on innovation in that specific category. We removed that term from the title and instead put a tremendous amount of focus on looking at how your organization has established itself as a leader pan-industry with respect to ethics and compliance as well. So we really stepped away from that difficult to measure innovation metric and again put some more emphasis and focus on the leadership and recognition components of this particular category. And what we're really excited about is providing you all more opportunities to demonstrate and showcase to us how your company, again, is an ethical leader amongst your industry peers and beyond as well. So we're really excited about what we'll see as part of this particular edit to the questionnaire as well. Looking at some, yeah, please, Clea.
Through about, on average, how many hours would you say it takes to complete the process from start to finish? I don't know, and maybe Doug, you can expand on this. I don't know that there's a specific average. There is an inherent value in having gone through the process before, having access to past survey responses, but depending on how many people you have working on the survey and responding to questions, if there's one person overall who's responsible, so there's not an average that we can really share, unless, Doug, I'm wrong.
No, Clay, I think you're absolutely right. It really does depend on the specific organization. Here are some considerations I found that impact the duration it takes to complete the application. One is the centralization of your compliance program and related efforts. If it's centrally managed, centrally located, centrally run, you'll have a much easier time, I think, getting answers to the questions that you have. That may reduce the time it takes. Your relationship with various other internal control functions within your company will impact the duration of the survey as well. So if you are close with the CSR folks, internal audit, risk, finance, other groups, you will have an easier time getting your questions answered, which again will impact the timeline it takes to complete the survey. So it really does depend. You'll notice as we progress to the avoiding common pitfalls section of today's presentation, the very first thing we mentioned is really start early. For those of you who are embarking on this journey for the first time, it always takes more time than you think, or plan on it taking more time than you think. It's a cross-functional, in-depth effort that really, I think, lends credence to the fact that why this designation is so well respected in the space. It's a challenging process. It's not challenging. We certainly don't intend to make it a challenging process from the outset, but certainly the depth to the questions asked, the resources we request, really make this a challenging, engaging, and really worthwhile process overall. So this is a very long-winded way of saying start early. It really depends upon your organization in terms of how long it'll take you. But we do ask, again, that in order to achieve that November 9 deadline, please do start early. Please do start early. But again, great question as well.
One other question that I want to make sure that we do address. Somebody asked, what happens if you're new to the process, you end up getting a low or not favorable score, and will that impact negatively, will that play out negatively in the media? So I want to make sure that everybody is clear. This is a confidential process. We do not share a listing of companies that apply and don't make the list. We only communicate about honorees who make the list. So we don't share your scores. We actually, we don't let any company share their scores publicly, even those who make the list, because we don't want there to be any sort of ranking. But the process is confidential. If you don't make the list, your company is not listed, your scores are not shared. That is a really big part of how we get companies into the process, right? Not everybody can win. So that answers another question that we've received in terms of companies that apply. We don't share the number of companies that apply because it would be very easy to deduce which ones apply and don't make the list. So we don't share that information, but we also don't share and keep everybody's information confidential.
Yeah, thank you, Clea. And that's a great question as well. And if you recall sort of the outset of the presentation, one of our key tenets of Ethisphere as an organization is a focus and emphasis on celebrating those who are exemplars in these different assessment areas, right? Our focus and attention is always been placed on those doing business the right way. It's if you want negative attention on organizations, open any media outlet, open any media resource. Our attention and focus is on those doing it the right way. So we always make sure that we put the spotlight on the honorees, those who we celebrate. Scores, non-honorees are never published in any capacity. So we don't share that information. We do. The only context with which scores will be shared is in that analytical scorecard to the individual companies. And again, that will consist of your score and then the anonymized aggregated scores of other honorees. So your score itself will not be used in any other public context as well. So great question. Great question. Turning back to what's changed for 2019, looking at the documentation request, the big change here is twofold. We made some pretty substantial changes to process, but also philosophy, right? I had mentioned that documentation throughout the years for WME has really consisted of a balance of using documentation to not only verify responses of the survey, but also attest to the quality of your program. And for 2019, we're tipping the scales slightly towards quality. We're using the documentation less as a vehicle to simply verify the answers, but instead we really want to get to the elements of your program and be able to assess and attest to the quality of them. So a slight shift, but certainly one where we want to articulate and let you know that we're really putting a focus on going in depth into various elements of your program through the documentation. And how it's manifested in terms of our process is a few slight changes. So for one, I had mentioned before that we've actually revised our guidance to make sure that it's substantially more clear. We've provided much more clear articulation of how the documents relate to the survey, and have actually, as you can see here on the screen in front of you on the right, we've called out within the survey itself where documentation is called out as well and recommended to provide to support your answer. So we've made a concerted effort to make sure that we're much more clear on what's required, when it's required, and in what format we'd like to see it in. So we hope this lightens the load, or lightens the burden for those of you who are responsible for completing the application, and certainly, and we welcome feedback as well as you go through the process. But certainly, we hope this is an improved and a much more engaging process for you as well with respect to documentation. Clea, if you don't mind, would you want to touch on a little bit more about the additional contact fields we've added, as well as the fee as well for 2019?
Absolutely. So we want to make sure that we are notifying all the proper folks within your organization at the close of the process. So when we notify companies whether or not they've made the list, we want to make sure that we're sending that to the appropriate folks. So we have added in 2 additional fields. The first contact field is for the person who has that responsibility for completing the survey. That is, as Doug mentioned, the person who sort of will own the process internally within your organization. There is a secondary field for those folks who should receive communications related to the application, whether that is the determination notification, ongoing communications and reminders and things of that nature. And then there is a third field for the appropriate media contacts within your organization. If your company does make the list, it is really important to have somebody within the PR, communications, marketing functions who will know what to do with the recognition. There are a bunch of resources that we provide to the honoree community that we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, but having a communications, public relations person involved in this process will help us move along that announcement as we get closer to that timeline. And then with regards to the fee, I have received a few questions related to the fee, so I'll address those now. We have analyzed the amount of time that we spend on a per company basis reviewing your application. So it's not just the survey and the quantitative output that comes from that survey, but a lot of it has to do with our own review process, the litigation reviews, the reputation reviews, things like that. So we evaluated the amount of time and effort going into each company, and that is what sort of influenced our decision to raise the price. Somebody did ask if the fee is refundable. It is not. It is in order to process your application, to do the full review and consider your organization for the list.
Wonderful. Thank you, Clea. We had a few more questions come in, one of which was, going into a little bit more detail in terms of how selections for honorees are determined based upon that peer comparison I discussed earlier. Great question. Really, the focus of that is based on our demographic section of the survey, and in a little bit more detail behind how we do that is we fully understand, given a company's risk profile, organizational structure, that comparing some organizations to others isn't appropriate. So for those public versus private, we certainly understand public companies are, by requirements, have to have certain elements of their programs in place versus privates. And we take that into consideration as we line up similar organizations amongst themselves. So we really do consider organizational structure, size and resource base, as well as risk profile and industry as well, to make sure that we have organizations that are grouped together, comparable, similar enough to make relevant comparisons as part of this process in determining the list for WME for each year. Consequently, there is no set number of companies we recognize each year. We recognize 135 honorees for 2018, slightly less for 2017, and the numbers fluctuated every year from that. And that's largely a byproduct of the mix of organizations that do apply. It's certainly not connected to application activity, but rather as the mix changes of applicants, as we get a higher concentration in certain industries or certain peer groups or risk profiles, that will limit the ability to recognize organizations relative to the number that apply. So that number is really a byproduct of the mix of organizations that do apply, and certainly we're not tied to any specific amount for any given year as well.
I did also receive a couple of questions related to the length of the survey, not just how long it takes to complete, which we already addressed, but also the total number of questions. So the approximate number is around 200. There is skip logic involved in the process, so not all companies will answer every single question.
Yep, that's right. And as we've said before, too, we will provide PDF and Word copies of the survey for you to review well in advance of opening up the online survey. So you will all have a chance to review it in detail before even embarking on your very first question. So please do review it if you're on the fence regarding applying. Absolutely.
Doug, there's also a question about whether or not the survey, the PDF versions, will tell folks the character limits for answers. I don't know the answer to that question.
Oh, good question. It will. It will. Yeah, most have a limitation of 500 characters. Some have 1,000. Some have 2,000 with respect to limitations. So we do request that responses in the online survey adhere to those character limits. However, for any instance where the survey itself requests an open-ended text response or a written response, if your response exceeds the character limit designated, you're welcome to include as part of your supporting documentation a separate Word file or text edit file that contains your response in more detail. So don't feel constrained to that character limit if in the event your response requires more explanation. Please do submit as part of your supporting documentation additional write-ups as needed as well. So feel free to use that to the extent that the character limit is too restricting.
Doug, that actually leads to another question that we received about whether or not only the documentation that we're listing in the documentation guide. So if you could address that, what we're looking for, and not just what's listed in the documentation guide.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, the question is, are we limiting what's provided to only what's in the documentation guide? Is that correct, Clea? Roughly? Okay. Yeah, it's a great question. The documentation guidelines, again, I had mentioned, are very specific in terms of what we'd expect to see if available for your organization. We fully expect that not every organization has everything we request. So first and foremost, start with what's requested in those documentation guidelines. You are welcome to provide any other information that is related to what's requested or that you believe helps support your case for becoming WME. However, what we focus on as a review team and evaluation panel is those materials in the supporting documentation guidelines. So again, you're welcome to submit above and beyond what's written, but our focus and attention is specific to those documents that we do list in the guidance. Okay. All right. Well, great questions, everyone. Please do keep them coming. I believe we have a few more minutes left, at least 5 or 6 minutes left in the presentation. So we have a few more slides to get through, but please, as questions do arise, do submit them. I do want to move forward with common pitfalls that we've seen as a review team to help you as you embark on your applications for 2019. Many of these we've covered already due to your questions or comments we've received, but we'll go through them quickly anyway, just to make sure that you all have a solid footing with which to proceed for 2019. As I had mentioned before, please do start early. If you have not had a chance to go through this process in the past, it most likely will take more time than you're anticipating. It's a very robust application process, and we do expect, again, it to take more time than you're expecting for the first time. So please do start as early as you can. And I had mentioned before the FAQ section of the website. Take a look. It contains a lot of great resources and advice on how to proceed with your application. Do take a look at those materials before getting too far in your application. And also leverage that PDF in the Word version of the survey as well. Again, this is something we've discussed previously, but I'll reiterate it here as well. Do take time to review the survey in PDF and Word format. Use it as a resource to circulate amongst your teams across your organization for input from other departments or teams. And review and make sure your questions are organized, your answers are organized and ready to input before embarking on the online survey. It'll make your life a lot easier as you navigate the tools. And certainly it provides you a chance to review the materials and make sure that you're ready for 2019 as well. Also, again, something we've discussed in the past, but having a single individual own the online survey process will ensure that there's no technical issues. We've had instances in the past where multiple individuals in one organization have navigated the online survey, overwriting one another's answers. We think we have that issue resolved, but again, to simplify your process, we suggest having one individual go through and complete the survey as well. Also, those who have had a chance to apply previously, we are more than happy to provide last year's results in PDF format. So take advantage, for those of you who have done it in the past, happy to provide you a copy of your EQ results as well. We did have a question come in that I will interject right now regarding the navigation of the questionnaire for 2019. Has it changed from last year? Can you skip right to a section? Do you need to, or is it still question by question? Unfortunately, right now it's still it's structured in a similar fashion that the survey is navigated online on a question by question basis. This is yet another reason why we emphasize focusing on that PDF and Word version before engaging with the online survey. We've explored navigation tools in the past. Unfortunately, none seem to meet the criteria we're looking for. So right as of now, it is still a question by question navigation for the time being with respect to the survey. Going back to the pitfalls, again, lean on the documentation guidelines. It's there to be your guide. We've, again, put a lot of effort in terms of specifying what's required for each section, tying it to questions, and as well, making sure that it's your guide as you collect, organize, and submit materials to support your application. And finally, one common pitfall is, save a record of all your materials that you provide. This is a great chance to have a centralized collection of resources specific to your program. We've heard of organizations in the past who've gone through the process very complimentary of, we now have a repertoire on hand of everything specific to our program that we didn't have in the past. So keep handy all your materials. If anything, it'll be a great resource as you apply in future years. Many of the documents that don't get updated can be applied again in future years. So keep a resource handy, keep your collection handy of what you use as you navigate the process, and it'll be a great resource. And also, you will have questions, whether you're a veteran or, again, new to this process. The team makes ourselves available. Please reach out, wmeapplications@fsphere.com. We'll go to the entire team. We'll be happy to address your questions, your concerns. If you have difficulty interpreting a question, please do reach out. We realize, again, this is a very robust process by design, and we want to make sure that you have the adequate support sufficient support as you navigate the application as well. Well, great. So with that in mind, Clea, perhaps you want to discuss for the panel important dates coming up as well beyond the November 9th deadline.
Absolutely. So as I have been chatting with folks submitting questions related to the timeline for opening and closing of the survey, the survey opens today. After this webcast later on today, those, as Chelsea mentioned, who have applied in years past will receive a custom survey link automatically, so you don't need to submit any forms. If you have not participated in the past, then we will send you a link to submit a request for your custom survey link. The survey will close November 9th, that's a Friday, and we typically say by end of day, 11:59 p.m. Eastern on November 9th. We are shooting for an early February notification timeline. That date may change as in years past, or not years past. Last year we announced a little bit earlier than we had it in prior years, so we're looking at a February 2019 announcement date as well. we do provide a series of resources that I'll talk about on the next slide, but we do have our honoree gala dinner on Tuesday, March 12th, and we have the Global Ethics Summit that occurs in tandem with that dinner on the 13th and 14th of March. And then mid to late March, we will be sending out the analytical scorecard. So I did receive a couple of questions about when you get your results. After we have tallied all of and done all of the research and done the entire review, and we've determined who is making the list, that's when we can create and generate the scorecards, because by that point is when we will know who's made the list and who you're going to be benchmarked against. So we're looking at a mid to late March, and then we will start scheduling sessions for benchmarking. If you're a Bella member, benchmarking is included in your Bella membership. So if you're going through this process, specifically for the benchmarking analysis, those benchmarking those benchmarking sessions will be scheduled beginning in March.
Great, Clea. And before we proceed, we had a few questions come in, and I wanted to make one additional comment as well. I know we're at the top of the hour right now, so for those of you who are required to drop off, we certainly understand. This recording will be made available later today or shortly thereafter, so you will have a chance to complete this presentation at your leisure as well. So for those of you who are able to stick around, we'll take a few more questions. To the extent that we do not get to your question today, we do have it on record, and we will be following up with everyone over email directly. So again, if we don't get to your question today, we'll be happy to follow up individually after today's presentation. A few questions to quickly address. We received a question about, will we receive the final survey link when we submit the fees? Not quite. You will actually receive the link and the survey link, that is, as well as the documentation guidelines, simply by requesting an application. And again, by being on today's live webcast, you will receive all that information automatically later today, tomorrow at the latest. So you will receive that information automatically well before you pay the fee. So with respect to the three required elements of the application, so the survey, the documentation, the fee, those three can be completed in any order as long as they're all three completed before November 9, on or before November 9. So make sure that those three are all addressed, again, in any order. You're welcome to submit the survey, complete the documentation, and then submit the fee. Again, all before November 9, so that's certainly an option. We also received another question regarding documentation submission. If using FTP to send supporting documentations, are the documents sent in bulk afterwards referencing the appropriate section, or are they attached during the process when answering the questions? Great question. So the act of completing the survey and submitting the documentation are actually discrete events, separate events. So the survey itself is managed wholly within our online survey process. Documentation is handled separately through our FTP process as well. So we do reference them in text across the survey and the guidelines, but however, we ask that documentation submitted through FTP or another method if FTP isn't available to you, independently of the survey itself. So again, the documentation guidelines outline the process as well in more detail, so I suggest turning those right away. And then finally, going back to the important dates, Clea, thank you for the information behind these. I do want to emphasize that I know we're pressed for time, we're moving a little bit quickly, but the Gala Awards Dinner celebration is a remarkable event. For those of you who haven't had a chance to see it, I suggest taking a look at some of the materials from last year, but we do put a lot of time and effort. We have a great events team that we put together a great celebration for those of you who are recognized 2019, and it's quite an event. So as more information comes out for the Gala Awards Dinner and subsequently the Global Ethics Summit for 2019, do take a look at those materials and just to give you a sense of how we celebrate those who do get recognized. So I think it's a really great event. I just want to put a little bit more attention towards that as well. So Clea, sorry for stealing your spotlight. I'll turn it back to you with respect to resources.
That is quite all right. This is a really quick slide, but just want to let everybody know that we do, once we let companies know whether or not they've made the list, we refer to that as the World's Most Ethical Companies community. We offer those who are new to the list or new to the process, or anybody in general who wants some additional information, an opportunity to talk with someone internally within the marketing team who can help you with planning your communications. We have a full calendar that's developed for everybody, so that way you know when the announcements can be made, what the deadlines, what the timelines are. We can help guide you through the gala dinner. We get lots of questions about things like attire, timeline, seating, things like that. So this person will be able to communicate with you on an ongoing basis around questions you might have related to being on the list, and questions that you may not know to ask. And then getting the most value out of your recognition. I generally work very closely with the communications functions within World's Most Ethical Companies to help them get the full use and value out of the recognition. We develop a very robust resource center for the honoree community. I had planned on showing that. We don't really have time to show the resource center, but it has links to some really great information. We also post resources and webcasts. There are examples of usage for the designation as well to that resource center. And then all applicants, not just honorees, do have resources in addition to the analytical scorecard, which we've talked extensively about. We do put out a research report with best practices and leading trends from the WME community. That is a really useful tool as you're going through the scorecard. You can compare and contrast different elements and program improvement aspects that you could actually put into practice. And then the benchmarking calls is a really great opportunity to talk through your application on the whole with very comparative results. The benchmarking is done on it's a peer review, so it's not just how you did against the entire community, but a more in-depth look at others within your industry, but also of similar structure, size, makeup, etc.
Wonderful.
So with that,
Thank you, Clea.
Absolutely.
That's great. Very good. So we're several minutes past the hour, so we will take this opportunity to wrap the presentation. However, as I mentioned before, Clea and myself are both available for any questions you all have. WMEapplications@fcc.com is a great resource to get your questions answered as well. So thank you for all of you who managed to stay on the line beyond the hour. We look forward to receiving your materials and answering your questions for 2019. I'm very excited to be entering this phase of the application process and look forward to speaking with you and engaging with you all throughout the year. So thank you very much.